All
Okay,
right, it
ready
says
to
it's
go.
recording now.
Great. Thanks, Natalie. Um, yeah, so my name is Vera Fabian, and I was one of you back in my freshman year. I took this class in 2004. Was that 2004, Greg? I
Yeah,
think.
that sounds right, because yeah, you went on my Sierra Nevada trip in 2004.
Yeah, and it really, I mean, as a freshman, that class had a big impact on me. I remember we read The Omnivore's Dilemma, and that book, I feel like so many people, that book really kind of got me thinking about food very differently. And then I went on the Sierra Nevada trip with Greg and a bunch of awesome people who are still, many of whom are still my friends. Tyler's actually coming out to the farm to help today, um, from a safe distance. And I think, yeah, I mean, I'm here to talk to you guys about some of the things that I did as a student that kind of got me on the path to becoming a small, sustainable or vegetable farmer. And I can talk to you a little bit about my farm, which is called 10 Mothers Farm. We're located in Cedar Grove, which is probably 30 minutes from Chapel Hill. And we sell through a CSA program, which stands for Community Supported Agriculture, to 180 folks all over the Triangle. But we'll get there. So I'm glad to be here. And Greg, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for doing this webinar with us. I'd like to begin by going back to your student days. I know as a student, you were really concerned about global food security, especially in low-income countries, interested in economic development, how you could help people, and that motivated you to sign up for a study abroad program in Mali that was run through SIT. And that program taught you a lot, but not what you were hoping for. You kind of pointed you towards what you thought you wanted to do and decided that's not what you wanted to do, like the idea of working for a big global NGO. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, I feel like you put that well. I'm amazed that you remember all of that. Yeah, so I signed up for that program because I thought that I wanted to work in sustainable development and specifically things around food security and food sovereignty in sub-Saharan Africa. And I chose Mali because it's one of the world's poorest countries and it's less developed than a lot of countries because of that. And I guess I just wanted to sort of see a place that was very different and that was maybe, I don't know. Yeah. So I went with all sorts of ideas about what I was going to get out of it. And it was an amazing program. We, you know, we got a chance to kind of shadow and work with lots of different players in the whole sustainable development world over there. And I would say overall, I mean, it's hard to like sum it up in a nutshell because I could spend the whole time talking about this, but basically my takeaway was that a lot of the global NGOs were spending a lot of resources and not having a very big impact. And again, I don't want to like make too many generalizations, but some of them were doing more good than others, but some were also, it felt like doing harm in a way that kind of felt a little bit eerily like colonization. It just felt really murky. And I think I started to see all of the problems with, outsiders coming in and trying to solve other people's problems and relying on like funding from questionable sources. And one of the things that I did while I was there was I spent some time with a women's garden cooperative. And basically, I shadowed this one woman who had started this garden cooperative in a rural area. And she had started it as a way of growing food for her family because they were food insecure. And she also had done it as a way to raise funds for her children to go to school. And so here she was, dealing with a lot of basically the two big problems that a lot of people face in sub-Saharan Africa: access to food and access to education. And she literally had, like, on a grassroots level, started with just her family growing food and selling extra food to raise money for her kids' school fees. But then she had decided, like, this is working for my family. Why don't I spread that to other families? So she had taught other women close by how to start their gardens so they could solve the same problems. And so it was this relatively like small and very simple thing that didn't require a lot of money or organization from outside forces. And she was solving these like huge global problems. And spending time with her in her garden, it was the first time I had really helped grow food. I think I got hooked on the act of growing food itself. And then I also saw how we can really solve big problems with these simple, like more local solutions. And it was incredibly inspiring to me after months of sort of seeing all of these other projects not be super effective. Here was this local woman being incredibly effective. And so basically in that moment, I was like, I want to go home. I want to grow food. And I think I can help. Like I saw how America faces a lot of those same issues in different ways. And I kind of saw how I might be more helpful back home, working on issues around food and education.
And before you focused on the domestic aspects of food insecurity, could you tell us about how, as a student, so you were really excited about the idea that local NGOs were more effective than these big global NGOs, but you had a theory that the way to make this even more effective was to connect well-resourced people like in the United States with these local NGOs, and that's why you started Sweat. I mean, I'd love for you to tell that story, because today I don't see students putting what they learn into action the way students used to do. So please tell that story about Sweat and what Sweat did.
So Sweat, Sweat is a hilarious memory for me and for my friends who started it. We basically, some friends from the Sierra Nevada backpacking trip, we loved backpacking and climbing mountains together, and felt like there was something incredible that happened to us together while we were out there, you know, for 42 days in the wilderness. And we saw how it could, like, the physical challenge of like hiking and climbing together brought us together, kind of gave us time to reflect on what we cared about and what we wanted to do with our lives. And so it kind of really came out of the Sierra Nevada trip and our desire to continue to do things outside together, physical challenges. But we also were all people who really wanted to like save the world and do some good. So we were like, how can we combine our love of the outdoors and hiking with a desire to make positive change? And we thought like, oh, why don't we do like people do for 5Ks? For 5Ks, people raise money and then they run a race and they donate that money to a cause. So we were like, why don't we do that with a mountain trip? So and actually around the same time, I found out about a woman named Wangari Maathai who had started the Green Belt movement in East Africa. And basically she, similar to what I saw with that other woman in Mali, she saw that a lot of people's problems came from deforestation, whether it was like access to food or access to firewood or water. So she helped women, she basically started the Green Belt movement to help organize women to reforest, to start tree nurseries, to plant trees, to keep them alive. And I found her hugely inspiring and was like, how can I learn from the Green Belt movement and from her? And basically came to my friends and said, hey, why don't we try to raise money for the Green Belt movement and do it around like some physical outdoor challenge? And so we decided to climb Mount Kilimanjaro together and raise money as if it was a 5K and then donate that money to the Green Belt movement. A little bit convoluted, but that's what we did. And it was overall a positive experience, though looking back on it, I have lots of critiques, but it was good.
But you also did help plant trees, didn't you? You met with Wangari's daughter and
Yep.
assisted.
Yeah, we spent time with one of the Green Belt movement's like village groups at one of their tree nurseries and got to see sort of how they had organized as a community to grow and plant trees and help maintain the forest.
And the next year, you all went to Tanzania.
So that was part of the same year. So I wanted to go for as long as I could. And so before I met up with the sweat group, I spent time in a remote part of Tanzania with a man who basically he saw that a lot of challenges for farmer, like most people in sub-Saharan Africa are farmers. And he saw that a lot of the challenges for farmers had to do with lack of access to information because people, there weren't books or libraries, and the internet was at that time like really hard to like there wasn't much internet access there. People didn't have cell phones yet. So he was trying to connect farmers through radio and also through internet, in order to have them set up solar power to figure out how to preserve their harvest so that it would last longer. He was kind of a crazy, he was almost like he was an information geek who saw that he wanted to help farmers be better farmers so they could grow more food. So that was pretty cool too. I got to spend time with him.
And you all went back the next year and helped raise money to build a cistern, was it, or something for a
so
girls'
that was
school?
that was like the next generation of sweat people who did that, and I don't even remember all of the details. At that point I was graduated. So but they went back to the same place.
That was a cool organization. I remember the year after that, students went to Bolivia and helped build a greenhouse. So again,
Yep.
the community could produce more food by getting a head start indoors.
Cool.
Okay, well, let's talk about after graduation. So you mentioned you graduated and you had turned your attention to domestic food security. Can you tell us what you did after graduation?
Yeah, so I'm trying to like put myself back in my shoes. That was 2007. I really wanted to learn how to grow food. I wanted to become a better cook. I was really into cooking at that point, and I saw how sort of issues around food and agriculture, cooking and growing food are so connected. So I wanted to learn both of those skills. I also really wanted to be involved in education, and I wanted to help people learn what I had learned about where their food comes from and that sort of thing. And so I found out while I was a senior, I found out about an organization in California called the Edible Schoolyard that a chef named Alice Waters had started at a public middle school in Berkeley. And basically it was a school garden and kitchen where middle schoolers would have garden class and kitchen class as if it was like, gym or art or something. And they had woven the curriculum into the public school curriculum. So in the garden, they would learn, math through like the number of seeds you need to plant per foot. And in the kitchen, they might learn, history lessons through, learning about the Silk Road while cooking with spices, that sort of thing. So it was a very interdisciplinary program. And I basically, when I heard about that program, I was like, that is what I want to do right now. I really want to be teaching young people this stuff. So I applied for an AmeriCorps position out there and got it and moved out there. And it was an amazing place to start. I think it's sort of the grandmother of lots of similar programs that have sprung up all over the country. And in the Bay Area, like almost every public school has a program, at least a garden program and often a kitchen program as well. And it's just amazing to see these are really diverse schools with kids from all backgrounds, and it's amazing to see how if you learn about these things at a young age, how it can really change like how you see the world and your place in it. And kids, even middle schoolers are just a lot more open to this sort of thing than adults are. And, you see kids like picking their own greens and then cooking them, and they're so much more likely to eat those greens than if they just got them on their plate. So yeah, it was definitely, that was a life-changing experience and a great place to learn. And I spent the next 5 years, I helped start a similar program in New York City after that. So yeah, it was a great way to kind of get my feet wet.
So tell us a little bit about what you did then in New York City.
Yeah, so the Edible Schoolyard was looking to expand, and basically there was a public school in South Brooklyn, like out kind of near Coney Island, and that was the school that they chose to work with. And it was on Avenue X, and it's in what was an old Italian American neighborhood that, like, so all of the older folks that live in the neighborhood are Italian Americans, but now it's like immigrants from all over the world. So it was pretty neat. There were a lot of Central and Eastern Europeans from like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and a lot of Chinese immigrants and Egyptians, and definitely like pretty classic, like very working class New York City neighborhood, and a school that had a big parking lot behind it. Like kind of a lot of the New York schools just have this big like asphalt lot behind it. And when they hired me, I was like the second employee, and they were like, "Are you ready to turn this parking lot into a garden?" And I was like, "All right, I'll do it." And it was crazy. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. We tore up the asphalt and brought in a lot of compost, and, you know, basically like worked really closely with the teachers at that school to figure out how to get the kids out to be part of building this garden. And it was amazing. Like, I think that my favorite thing about that job, I learned a lot about like developing curriculum, which was cool, but I think my favorite thing about it was seeing how the garden really brought the community together. Because of all of these immigrants, again, like most of the places where people had moved from were more rural and agricultural. And it showed me how agriculture is this thing that kind of binds us all together. And, you know, people of all ages literally would just like stop on the sidewalk looking through the chain link fence, and they would be there. They would like get so excited that we were planting, you know, a school garden, and they would offer to bring like a baby fig tree that they had in their garage, or they would offer to, you know, bring seeds from their Russian grandmother's garden. Or we had one, and again, this is like an amazing long story, but in a nutshell, there was a man named Joe who was in his 80s, who had graduated from that same elementary school in the 30s, I think, who had gardened his whole life in that neighborhood in like tiny little, you know, yards. And he came by with a whole plan. He wanted to show people what you can grow in a small space. And he asked if he could have like a demonstration garden as part of the garden. So he kind of became part of the garden. He was out there every day, you know, hunched over his plants, and he just like loved getting to share his life's hobby with the school children. So yeah, the garden really like an amazing community formed around that garden.
Oh, it's really great. And you did that. And at some point you decided, I guess what came first, the idea of coming back to North Carolina or the idea of starting a farm?
Definitely the idea of farming. So my husband, Gordon, and we met at the Edible Schoolyard in 2007, and both of us knew we wanted to farm, but we really had no idea how we were going to do it. Neither of us had grown up farming. We didn't have access to land. So I think we worked our city jobs, and the whole time we thought about how we were going to figure out how to farm. And in 2012, we were like, all right, this is it. We got to do it. We left our city jobs and we apprenticed ourselves to farmers that we really looked up to. So we worked for a farmer named Bob Kennard in California. And then after that, Elliot Coleman in Maine. And that was sort of like farming grad school for us. And it's great. Like, we didn't make a lot of money, but we didn't have to pay for grad school. It was a free education through the work that we did. And we learned so much that year. And we decided it was basically either we go to California, where Gordon's from, or North Carolina, where I'm from. And we decided on North Carolina because land is more affordable here and there's water. So we moved back here, and then we worked for Ken Dawson at Maple Spring Gardens for 2 years here in order to sort of learn farming in North Carolina before we started our own farm in 2015.
How was it starting a farm? Can you talk about some of the challenges as a young person starting from scratch?
Yeah, so there are a lot of challenges. I mean, I think the first one is just working up the courage to do it, because like I said, if you don't grow up farming, I think it can feel really intimidating. And so I think that we worked up the courage. I mean, during those years when we were living in the city, we read lots of farming books, and whenever we had a chance to get out of the city, we would try to go visit farms to learn, like, just to see what it was like and ask farmers questions. And I think that, you know, reading and visiting farms really sort of helped us solidify, like, this is really what we want to do with our lives. And here are other people who are like us and who figured it out. So, like, hey, maybe we can do it too. So working up the courage was the first one. The second one is access to land, for sure. I think that as a young person, like, figuring out how to be able to afford land, and then not just the land, but it's like you also have all these other startup costs on top of the land, which can feel daunting as well. And I think that there are, again, a lot of things that could be said about access to land, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I think that one reason why our farm is very small. So we farm pretty much just 1 acre. And part of that is because that's how we like to farm. We prefer it staying small so that we can kind of like, I like to think of it as human scale. Like, it's very easy to wrap my mind around it. You know, I can walk the whole farm in 10 minutes and see everything and observe more closely. But part of it is practical. Part of it is, like, we wouldn't have been able to afford a large piece of land. So I think that, and I'm seeing a lot of new farms and beginning farmers farming this way for that reason, that it makes farming more accessible to those of us that didn't inherit land.
Mm-hmm. You started out renting. I guess part of it was you were trying to get the money to buy land, but also it's less risky maybe to rent land because you're learning, and probably, would you say, just as important, you were building your seeing if you could build a customer base before you invested the money in land?
Totally. Yeah. So I would say, like, the success, we're now in year 5, and it feels like we're a pretty secure business at this point, as farms go. But I think that was only possible because of the land that we were renting for those first 3 years. So basically, we found a family that had a big yard, essentially, and that family wanted to see their land farmed. And the couple had farmed initially themselves. And so they had already set up some of the infrastructure, like a deer fence, and they had a small walk-in cooler, and they had water already. And so it was really like a huge blessing that we found them. It kind of served as an incubator farm for us. And it meant that, yes, as we were starting out, we were making mistakes. We were building our customer base. We were able to do all of those things within the low risk situation of renting land. And also it means that we were able to figure out exactly what we needed while looking for land. Because I think if we had bought land right away, it would have been the wrong property. So as much as I wanted to be on our own land from the beginning, it's like hard to, we made a lot of investments in the soil that we then left behind. It was well worth it because it really helped us get started strong.
And it makes me want to go back to a question. When you were thinking about California versus North Carolina, I would imagine that the opportunities for people who want to do small sustainable farming is that you have to be near a fairly large population center where there are people who share these values. And I'm imagining that in California, the cost of getting land in that kind of scenario is just impossible. That North Carolina still has affordable land next to population centers like RTP.
Totally. Yep. Yep. That is exactly. I mean, people we know who farm in California, they are not going to own their land. They have long-term leases, and most of them don't live on their farms. So yeah, it's a very different situation out there. And then like water rights also are extremely expensive. So yeah, it's very different. And that, I mean, that's partly why there are so many great small farms in this area, is because there is relatively affordable land closer to a really good market. Though that is changing. I mean, land is not as nearly as affordable as it was, even 12 years ago, I would say. So development pressure. Yeah, the irony is that all of our good markets are places that are also experiencing a lot of development pressure. So yeah, I mean, I guess I can go ahead and talk about that right now. Basically, one of the things that I think we need a lot more of are farmland trusts. So basically, what a farmland trust does is it raises money from a community of people, and it buys property that is good farmland close to a market and buys the development rights to it. So they put like a conservation easement on that land so that it can't ever be turned into a subdivision, and then resells that property at a much lower cost to farmers. So what it does is it preserves farmland in places that would otherwise just get developed. And like, especially in this area, something I didn't realize until I was a farmer in this area, it's even more of an issue because of our soils here. A lot of the soil around here does not perk, which means that it is not, it's not the type of soil that you need for a septic system. And developments obviously need septic systems. And so the land that does perk, that is suitable for development, is also the best farmland. So it's not only that, like, the reason why we're losing farmland so fast is because the best farmland is also the best development land. And so without having farmland trusts in place, like, we're just going to lose. I mean, we already have lost a ton of good farmland, but I really think that this area could use a farmland trust. There is no one that's doing that around here. And when we farmed in Maine, there was the Maine Farmland Trust that did incredible work with this. And it helps retiring farmers pass their farms on to beginning farmers, which is a big issue around here. A lot of the people who are in their 60s are trying to retire and, would like to see their farms stay in farmland, but maybe can't afford to without a farmland trust to facilitate that exchange. So that's like a big sort of a bigger picture systemic thing that I think we need in order to have more resilient farm, like local food systems. And it's not just farmland trust, like some local governments have actually stepped in and done some of that farmland protection. I know Boulder, Colorado has done something where they have added a small tax that they then use to buy farmland around the perimeter of town. And then they either do long-term leases. I can't remember exactly what the arrangement is with farmers, but they basically make that land accessible to farmers. And basically what they're saying is, like, our citizens value having access to good local food. We value having beautiful farmland around us. and we want to put a dollar value to that because otherwise it won't be there. So
it's actually a really cool policy tool that a government like Orange County could buy it, and it's not a huge financial commitment
no.
because they're buying the land, putting the covenant on, maybe taking a loss because now the land can't be put in to a big suburban track, but it's still it needs to be replenished a little bit. It would be like a revolving fund that just keeps getting topped up just a bit. It doesn't seem like something that's exorbitantly expensive. It's just a matter of ideology that in the US, with our neoliberal ideology, we often think that government shouldn't be in the job of doing X, Y, and Z, in this case, being a land agent. But
Yeah.
it seems to make a lot of sense that this is an easy policy tool for county governments to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Also, it's a lot of students always dream of starting an NGO. This seems like a really farmland trust, a really good niche for somebody who's gung-ho about creating an NGO and running it.
Yeah,
Good
definitely.
space.
Please look up the Maine Farmland Trust. They're awesome.
Well, I want to get back to how you got your own land because I know there's an interesting story too there that you and your husband went in with two other parties. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the farm that we worked on in Maine was a big inspiration to us because it was basically, again, another long story, a great book, The Good Life by Helen and Scott Nearing, that was basically like they were back to the landers in I want to say the 30s or 40s, back in that back to the land movement. There have been multiple generations of the back to the land movement. And they basically homesteaded in this remote part of Maine, and they had young people come from the city and spend time with them. And some of those young people stuck around, and Helen and Scott Nearing decided to sell pieces of land off to young people who also wanted to homestead around them. And so they kind of formed this community of like-minded people up there. And the farm where we worked on was one of those young people who had bought land from Helen and Scott. And they had like a really tight-knit group of neighbors, all of whom grew their own food and were very almost self-sufficient. And they all had built themselves saunas, and every week they would sauna at each other's houses and have potlucks. And I think for Gordon and I, like, we moved there from New York City and had never experienced neighbors like that, who knew each other really deeply, who like helped each other out, and who saw each other every single week, if not twice a week, at these community gatherings. And we thought, like, we really want to farm, but a lot of farmers are really isolated. They live out in the country by themselves, and we didn't want that. We love people. We wanted to have people around us. And so we were like, okay, if we look for land, the dream would be to be able to find land with friends. And it sounded very idealistic. And when we started looking for land, we saw how hard it was going to be, but we stuck with it. And it kind of came down to the 11th hour. The lease on our rented land was about to run out, and we knew we had to figure out what we were going to do. And we had almost given up on finding land with other people when this property came up on the market. And three friends of ours and us, we went out there together, looked at it, and we put in an offer that afternoon because it really kind of suited all of us. And yeah, so we bought, the three friends of ours plus us, we bought 26 acres, half woods, half open, and then we subdivided it into parcels. So we each own our own individual parcel, and then we own one parcel in common. And that was a year and a half ago that we bought that property, and we've slowly been all sort of carving our spots into the land. I mean, it was totally bare land. There was no electricity, no water, no infrastructure. So we've been very busy, like, for us, like, moving the farm out there and getting it set up and growing. And then as a community, we're meeting regularly and trying to figure out sort of what we want. We all are people who want like a land-based life, and we're trying to figure out sort of what are resources that we can share and what is our relationship to each other going to look like over time, that sort of thing.
Cool. That will be interesting to follow how you all decide to use that land, and
Mm-hmm.
be interesting to see the history of as your joint effort continues.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to ask you now. So you've got this new piece of land, and you mentioned there's different quality soils. Um, One thing I know from the history of the Southeast is that early farmers were pretty brutal on the land. And that's why, for example, cotton had continually needed new land, because it would just completely exhaust the soils, wear it out. And that's why there was this westward movement of a lot of these commodity crops that were grown in the South. What kind of state did you find the soil in where you are, and what have you had to do to what have you been doing with the soil to improve it?
Yeah, so part of why we liked this property is that the soil is better than a lot of the soil is around here, but that's not saying much because the soil around here is really shitty. It's like when farmers from other parts of the country visit, they cannot believe how bad the soil is here. Um, it's really bad. And yes, it's mostly due to tobacco farming and just like extractive farming practices. Um, the way that we farm and approach soil health is trying to build organic matter as quickly as we can, and farming on a very small scale helps with that because it's like we can afford to invest more because it's a smaller space. So we start by putting down a lot of compost, and part of that is, I think, also like trying to think about what we now call regenerative agriculture. The way we approach regenerative agriculture is that it's giving back more than we're taking. So, farming for a living, you're harvesting and selling goods. And every time you're harvesting nutrients out of your land. And that means that we have to give back more than we took out. And around here, when you think about sort of sustainable inputs, not all of our inputs feel sustainable. That is a reality of organic farming for profit, which we can get into a little bit. But one of the really sustainable inputs that we have, because we live close to a population center, is compost. We buy truckloads of compost from Brooks, and Brooks gets their compost from probably like the UNC cafeteria and restaurants and other, big operations in the area, and then they compost it and they sell it to farmers like us. So that feels like a really nice way to cycle nutrients from town. We put down a lot of compost. We don't till, so we don't have a tractor. And we started not tilling because we don't like weeding, and not tilling means that you have fewer weeds, but it also means that it allows the natural soil structure to be intact, because every time a farmer tills, you're just like breaking up that root system, you're breaking up the insect life, the whole microbiome that is soil, you're breaking it up. So by not tilling, our hope is that over time we will see the soil structure improve dramatically. And we can see it already. We've been farming out there just over a year, and between the compost that we've added, and we also add a ton of micronutrients, and then not tilling and leaving that soil structure in place, the soil is definitely improving quicker than it would with more conventional practices.
Um, I quickly want to add too, when I mentioned the history of the Southeast, another thing that makes the soil really poor here is North Carolina was unfortunate in that the glaciers didn't make it this far south. So glaciation helps reset the soil profile structure. It unleashes succession as rock is broken down. And one of the reasons why the Southeast has such poor soils is that we just missed out on glaciers.
Yeah.
But so that's a really important point you were making. A lot of people have this misconception of organic farmers surviving on no inputs, but outside inputs are critical, especially in a place like North Carolina, to creating a good soil structure.
Totally. I mean, we grow a lot of food. Like I mean, we grow 180 weekly boxes of food a week. I just said weekly. So it's a lot of food on a really small space. And so in order to get that level of production, you have to put a lot in. And we can't, like, there's no way we could grow all of the nutrients on our farm for that level of production. And that's somewhat just like the economic reality of trying to make a small farm work as a business. You know, like in traditional cultures, people would grow those inputs, but that was a subsistence lifestyle, not, you know, trying to make a living in America in 2020. So it's something that we think a lot about. And I know like every other organic farmer I talk to thinks a lot about how, you know, once you're in a more stable place in terms of making a living, like our next goal is sort of how can we be even more sustainable in our practices. And like, just to be clear, for those of you who don't know, basically I'm talking about like we buy in, you know, bone meal as our source of phosphorus, and that is coming from industrial animal farming, which obviously we don't support. So trying to think about ways to get those inputs to be more sustainable. And it's honestly, it's like the biggest question in the small farm world is sort of like, how do we figure that out? But in the scheme of things, like our farm is definitely more sustainable than sort of like big organic farms that are farming as if conventionally, but just with like organic approved inputs, because of not tilling, because of, you know, like we don't spray, like there are a lot of organic pest sprays that bigger organic farms use heavily that are broad spectrum that hurt beneficial insects. We don't do that. So I think that, you know, when I think of like organic farming, it's like a huge spectrum. And I would say that we're on that spectrum, we're doing pretty well, but there are still things that we have to figure
Um, can you talk a little bit also about, so we've talked about the soil. Can you talk about the land in and around the farm, how you're managing the ecosystem in a way to reduce things like pests, like certain plantings, and I imagine at least for some of the things you need pollinators, and what you do to, you know, in the midst of this pollinator crisis, what you have to do to ensure that you have sufficient pollination?
Yeah. So, I mean, basically we are like our long-term vision for the farm. There's a farm out in California called Singing Frogs Farm that is a no-till small farm that we look up to a lot. And throughout their farm, they have what they call beneficial hedgerows. And we just planted our first one this year. And every year, whenever the time and money allows, we plan on planting more. And it's hard because, like, obviously those are not cash crops. Those are not bringing in our living. But we see it as a long-term investment in the health of the land and in hopefully the health of our crops, and just what we believe in. So basically you're planting beds that are not annual vegetables, but that are perennial plants that attract beneficial insects. And, you know, if they're throughout the farm, then hopefully it'll help with our pest issues. In this, you know, farming organically in the Southeast, like we are up against a whole host of pests. And so I think we don't seem to have issues with pollination yet on our farm. And obviously we like want to support pollinators, but for us, it's really about attracting beneficial insects and trying to help with pest issues.
Well, thank you. Well, let's switch topics now and move to how it's very different to have a smaller organic farm when you're trying to develop relationship with customers where you're supplying them with a lot of their vegetables. That creates a totally different strategy than, let's say, an iceberg lettuce farmer in California who's got a monoculture and, just tractor or whatever, it goes down and, they seed a bunch of iceberg lettuce and people come in and harvest them.
Mhm.
You've got to supply your customers with a wide range of vegetables throughout the year. Can you tell us how that changes your strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. So we sell through a CSA, which means that, and we're kind of almost year round. Our production is a little bit smaller in the winter, but it means that, yeah, we have to grow because we're packing boxes for customers each week. We have to grow as many things as we can to keep everybody happy. So we grow, I think, 60 different crops a year, which is a lot. Um, and we base that off of every year we survey our customers and we ask them sort of like, what would you like less of? What would you like more of? And we really use that survey to crop plan. So when we crop plan in the winter for the coming year, we just sort of adjust. And then of course, like it also has to reach our goals in terms of how much money each crop is making so that the whole farm can continue to exist. But yeah, that's how we choose what we grow.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about how you acquired your customers?
Yeah, we started our first year with 34 CSA members, and that was really just friends and like a few friends of friends. So it was just word of mouth, and I think we worked really hard that first year to make everyone feel valued and give them a good value, and um, they were happy. And the next year we expanded to 54, and that was again just through word of mouth, customers telling their friends to join. And then we've just gradually grown each year. So the next year we were 74 members. And then the next year, which I guess I'm like getting my years mixed up. Last year, when we moved to the new land, we jumped from 74 to 125 members, which was a big jump in order to help us pay for starting the farm on the new land. And then this year, we're going to be 180. So, and it has, I mean, we've literally never paid for advertising. Like, it has just been through a happy customer base. And I think that, some of that is like trying to grow really high quality vegetables. And some of it is through the relationship with our members. And we don't see them on a weekly basis. Unlike a farmer's market customer, we drop boxes on porches. And so we don't have that face-to-face interaction with them, which I was really worried about as somebody who had worked for farmer's market farms before. But I think what we have tried to do is make up for that face time through spending a lot of time on our newsletters. So every week our members get a newsletter, and it has pictures of the farm, it has pictures of us, it has recipes, it has cooking tips, it has like sort of more personal updates from us farmers. And I think that through that newsletter, our members really do get to know us. We really express a lot of gratitude, and I think they feel like they're a part of something that matters. And then we do have events at the farm where members can come out. So I'm just seeing that somebody says my family's a member of your CSA. That's awesome. Great. Thanks, Catherine. It really like the CSA, I like get kind of like tingly feeling talking about it because the CSA is really like a special model. And I truly believe that if more businesses were run the way farms run CSAs, I think it could change the world. Like for us, like farming is an incredibly risky business. We're dependent on nature, and nature is insane. And I'm like not a risk taker under normal circumstances, but having a strong base of CSA members makes me feel much more secure as a farmer, because I know that like all of these people care about us and want to see us succeed. And they have skin in the game. They've basically like invested in our farm, and then in turn the farm is theirs, and they get, delicious food all year long, and they get to feel like they're contributing to something positive in their community. So the CSA is great. That's all I
Well, I only want to ask two more questions so I can open it up to others. Um, CSA is, so before you mentioned farmland trusts, and let's look at it from the other side, because CSAs are one for small sustainable farmers to survive. They need to have direct access to customers. Like, you couldn't make a living if you were selling your stuff to a large middleman who's going to sell it onto a grocery chain. You mentioned farmland trust is one thing communities can do, local governments. Are there other things that communities could do, maybe to help build the links between local farmers and customers?
That's a great question. What would I say? So yeah, the farmland stuff is a big one. I think one idea that I've been sort of obsessing on, especially in the coronavirus times, is how to, and I think it's sort of like similar to the sweat model, basically like people of means in our community could kick in a little extra money to help provide farm boxes or farm local food to people who are more food insecure. And it's something I'm thinking about, like within our CSA. I think next year maybe I want to try to do sort of like a sliding scale model where, we can offer, like, we can't, like the burden of making, I mean, all the time people ask me like, local food isn't accessible. Like, how can you make it more accessible? And I'm like, that should not be my job. Like, I'm already poor. Most farmers I know are already poor. Like, we can't charge less for our food. Food should be more expensive. Like, the problem is that we're competing against huge agribusiness where food is way cheaper than it should be because people are not getting paid a living wage. And the only way we can make our food more accessible to people in our community who might not be able to afford it is if it's subsidized somehow. So, I think about systemic ways that people can maybe pay a little bit, for people who can pay a little bit more for their food, and then that would help subsidize local food for people who don't make as much money. So that's something I'm thinking about. And obviously there are nonprofit organizations around here like Farmer Food Share who I think maybe should be doing something like that. And then, farm, like I could do it on a CSA level, or maybe it could be a local government figuring out how to do something like that too. But I think it would be a cool way. I mean, it would be sweet if it was a local government, because it's a cool way to both support more farmers growing more food locally and also getting that food to people who might not be able to afford it. So solving two problems.
It's an interesting idea. It reminds me of like the model where people sponsor children in other countries to help them with their education.
Totally.
My last question. I've had some people ask me how COVID-19 is affecting local farmers, and I haven't had an answer for that question. Can you tell
It
us?
it's been nuts. So I literally have never experienced the demand that we're experiencing right now. Um, every farmer I've talked to has been inundated with emails and calls from people asking for food. And I don't mean like people wanting to buy food, like never. It's never been like this. Um, I think it's a combination of things. I think people, are scared to go to the grocery store. Maybe people who used to shop at the farmer's market are scared to shop at the farmer's market. I think people who've never been interested in local food are suddenly realizing like maybe there are going to be supply chain issues. The produce aisle at the supermarket is not being restocked. Like, people are maybe freaking out about access to food from faraway places. People are at home, they're cooking more than they usually do. People are thinking about how to stay healthy more than they usually do. There, you know, I think there's like a whole host of reasons why this is happening, but it is crazy. So it's interesting to me. All of us farmers are talking about like, how can we try to make sure that this is something that endures, that isn't just a passing, you know, interest in local food? How can we sort of capture this interest? And yeah, I hope that it can be something that lasts beyond this crisis. And I'm trying to figure out ways to sort of help with that.
Well, that's very interesting. Actually, you know, I've talked to people who that's crossed their mind. How can I get secure access to local food in afraid of supply chain
And I
issues?
think it's also like, I mean, a couple more thoughts about it. I think that it's also an issue of trust. I think that in a moment like this, people are scared of things they don't know, you know, like most of the food at the supermarket, like who knows how many hands have touched that, and it feels less safe. Whereas food from a local farm, like it's touched maybe my hands and maybe like Gordon or Luke's hands, you know, like it hasn't touched that many hands and feels much safer and more trustworthy. Um, Another big change in the past few weeks, our farm has not changed that much because we're already a CSA farm. We already deliver in boxes. There's already very little like physical contact. But for farms who sell to restaurants, obviously they're having to completely do a 180 and figure out where their food is going to go. For farms who sell at farmers markets have actually been busy the last few weeks, but people are worried that that won't last. And they're also trying to figure out different ways to sell their goods. A lot of people are switching to online ordering, like pre-box, like people order online and then they box and deliver. And then a lot of farms are starting CSAs. So it definitely feels like a really good moment to be a CSA farm. And I think that that again may be a lasting change. Like I think a lot of farms are gonna be doing more online ordering and delivery. And I mean, I love farmers markets, and I certainly think that they will survive all of this. But I also think that having online ordering from local farms is opening up a whole new market opportunity there. So hopefully that will be a positive thing.
Okay, with that, let me open it up now to questions. I'm sure some of the people listening have questions they'd like to answer. When you ask your question, please remember to unmute your microphone. I'm sure somebody has a question.
Another thing I just thought of while people are thinking of questions, and don't be shy. Um, Another thing that I feel like could be done on sort of like a systemic or local government level, um, something that I think about is like we need a lot more farms like ours, and that means we need a lot more farmers like us. You know, like most farmers in this country are retiring age, and so I think a lot about the education side of it, probably because I used to teach, but like I think that, and I don't know, like it's hard to teach farming like this in schools. I guess I would love to see more programs that kind of pair students with farmers, getting kids out, both kids and like university students out to farms in their area. Because I feel like that's the best way to know if it's something that you want to do. And even if you don't want to be a farmer, like spending time on a farm will probably help you understand a lot of these issues. And then also like teaching cooking. Honestly, like in this moment where everyone's stuck at home having to feed themselves, if people don't know how to cook, like we can't have a resilient food system. So I would like to see more schools teaching cooking.
It's a good point. It's hard to be healthy in this country if you're not either super wealthy or you know how to cook. And I've been
Yeah.
reading articles that demonstrate people don't know how to cook, like people buying dried beans for the first time in their life and trying to do something with them and being
Yeah.
pretty turned off with the results.
Yeah.
I actually did have a question for you. So I know you said that when you started your farming, that you were on a piece of land that didn't really have any electricity or anything like that. So did you do anything with renewables when you went into farming?
We would love to. We have, I mean, again, this is like, we didn't have the time or the money to do it right off the bat. We just needed power out there to power our well so that we could water our plants that we had planted. We literally spent the first few weeks hauling water in buckets from the creek. That was how much of a time crunch it was. So as you know, I mean, as I'm sure you all know, renewables are like generally take longer to set up and cost more money up front, which is not something that most farmers have. So we don't have any renewable energy out there now. We are currently building a little house that we're going to live in, and we're trying to figure out how to get solar panels on it. We would love to have a solar powered well pump, but I've heard a lot of different thoughts on our well is deep because that's how far we had to go to get water, and how hard it can be to have a pump that's powerful enough for the amount of irrigation we're doing on solar. So would love to know more about that. Yeah, it would be great to have like an organization or somebody that is working to get more farms on renewable energy. I think, again, it's like farmers are just so strapped for time and money that it's often not something that is an urgent priority, even though it's something that we all care a lot about. But I think that as we have more time and more money, hopefully in the future, we'll add more solar out there.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
We'll have
Yeah.
to try to connect people like you to an organization called USI, United Solar Initiative.
Yeah.
They have, basically when a solar developer um, does a large project, they order panels, and these panels, at least up till now, the tax break hasn't been renewed, so it may go away in a few years. They have to order extra because some break, but often they end up with a lot of extra panels, but they can't then legally take those panels and use them for another project. So I'm heard rumors of a warehouse in North Carolina that USI has that just has a lot of extra solar panels in it,
Yeah.
projects. And this, I think the student organization hasn't done very much lately, so the panels have been accumulating. But I'll have
Cool.
to make that connection.
I also know, like, again, this is the sort of thing I've heard of farms getting grants to help install solar. So that's something that I should look into in my free time.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily run your pump on, it's a matter of having enough solar panels and then having some storage, which that price is also going down for those rainy,
Cool.
cloudy days. Well, actually, you don't need to water. Use your
Yeah.
pump on those rainy, cloudy
Yeah.
days. Other questions?
So, what is your vision for your farm in the future?
I think that my vision for our farm is just to become more regenerative. Like, I talked about, we planted our first pollinator hedgerow, or beneficial hedgerow. I would like to see those all over the farm. And those are all perennial plants that take time to get established. So I imagine, in 10 years, even like having hedgerows with those plants being much bigger and having, more habitat for beneficial insects and for other wildlife. In 10 years, I mean, even in 5 years, I'm like, our soil improving at the rate that it's improving, our soil will be beautiful and much easier to work. It'll require less labor on our part to care for that soil. It'll require fewer inputs. We're adding a lot now so that we don't have to add as much later. So in turn, our vegetables will be more abundant and more healthy. I imagine that, in time, like our ability to make because of all of these like environmental, like basically that the farm will be a thriving ecosystem, and a thriving ecosystem is more abundant, and therefore we'll be able to make more money off of that land, and therefore we'll be able to hire more people and pay a better wage and, you know, work less. So basically, like, to me, a thriving ecosystem is what we all need to thrive as humans. And I just imagine the farm becoming that, and all of us being able to have a higher quality of life as a result.
Thank you.
I was wondering, what do you think is the next significant technological advancement that'll push your farm into the future?
I mean, I don't know. I'm a pretty low tech farmer. I mean, we do sell our vegetables online through the CSA, but beyond that, like, we use hand tools. It's not like, and what we need are smarter hand tools, not better technology. So, I mean, I'm biased in this way, but to me, the solutions, we need more farmers farming this way, and more land to farm on, and more people eating this food. And I'm not sure if what we need is better technology.
Cool, thanks.
A quick comment, you mentioned more younger farmers. I'm not as familiar with agriculture as I am with the electricity business, and I know solar developers and electric utilities have had trouble attracting young people um, to jobs that involve a lot of outside work, because millennials and now the next generation grew up largely indoors. You mentioned how the Sierra Nevada trip and other things, your love of the outdoors. We haven't done a very good job of nurturing that love with younger people. And I know in the electric utility and solar installation business,
Yeah.
they've been heavily going after veterans, because veterans do have that skill set, the ability to survive North Carolina summer outside.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's a great, yeah, I definitely, like, the Sierra Nevada trip was, for me, it was like the most uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable I had ever been in my life. And yet it was definitely the happiest I had ever been. And I think that that experience made me see how, in a lot of ways, struggle is what gives us purpose and meaning. And I was like, honestly, like, I want more of that. I don't want less of that. I don't want to like be inside comfortable all the time if I don't feel like I have purpose and meaning in my life. So, I mean, farming in North Carolina is not comfortable most of the time. But it's great. I mean, it makes me feel more alive, and it's hard. I mean, we're trying to figure out how we can farm less during the hottest parts of the year for that reason. So it's not like I'm not a total sadist, but I would say that, yes, I think that getting more young people to spend more time outside and to push themselves physically is kind of critical, because it's how you stay healthy. And a lot of the important work that we need to do in this world is outside and is a physical challenge. And there's no way around that. So you just got to like suck it up and do the work.
Well, time for one last question. Anybody have a question? If not, we'll close it up. Or maybe Vera, you have some final comments?
No, I gotta get back to the farm, but yeah, thank you all. And I know this is a really weird time. I have been feeling a lot of weird feelings, and I can't imagine like being a college student right now and trying to figure out your lives. I think that I'm trying to stay hopeful, because I see a lot of people asking themselves a lot of really important questions about how our world is and how we can do better. And being a farmer right now, you know, like, I've never felt more needed. Like, agriculture is like number 2 on the list of essential activities during the stay-at-home order. You know, like people have to eat, and somebody has to do that work of growing food. And I feel very lucky to be growing food right now and to be able to still carry on doing that work and getting food to people. So I hope you all can try to make the most of this strange time. And I think there are going to be some really lasting solutions that come out of it. And hopefully you all will find your place in those solutions.
Thank you so much, Vera. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Greg.
Well, take care.
Bye.
Goodbye.